Hi, I'm Todd Schultz. I'd like to take a little bit of your time to introduce you to the mechanics of creating what are called entity relationship diagrams using the product Microsoft Visio 2013. As you should have a little background in, entity relationship diagrams have to do with representing a data model, how the data behind a system might be thought of and beginning to actually developing and working with the database, but it's more of on the management or user end to try to describe what's going on. Now, beyond that, getting deep into data modeling, you're getting that background in your course. This is really mechanics of, gee, I've got an idea in mind or maybe a picture on a back of a napkin and I'm trying to reproduce. So, this is not your introduction or demonstration of what data modeling is. This is more about the mechanics of what goes on in it. Let's see. Right. So the background, we're not treating in depth. So what does this mean, or what are some variations and that kind of thing. Keep also in mind that the exact details that you run into. Oh, well, I found a Chin's diagram and they use rounded instead of colored circles or something like that. The idea is that it represents a situation, and the exact detail, like the shapes or labeling the connectors or some things like that, may vary from place to place. And as always, remember, Visio is a good tool for communicating business principles, but not where you're going to find the ideas. So I always say, you got to write a document. Word processor helps you write it, but if you don't know what to say, you can open it up and stare at the blank screen and not make any process. So a couple of examples. This one's a little bit deeper than the one we might have to do at first, but very, very simple compared to real systems in practice. But I think anybody with a bit of a business or administration background can look at this and figure out what's going on with a little bit of guidance. The boxes here are the entities, the things that we're wanting to track in the system. And at just a glance, it looks to me, or it's obvious to me, unless they've just misnamed things to fool me, and I just pulled this off the internet 2 minutes ago. This is some kind of system about volunteers doing packing of items and putting them into a package. Okay, now how did I figure that out at a glance? And I've been looking at it exactly as long as you have. Well, I'm looking here at what they've called their entities. So the boxes are entities, the things that they want to keep track of. So I'm just, they want to keep track of assignments and volunteers and packing lists and packages and items and packing tasks, packing lists. All right, it doesn't take a bunch of rocket scientists to make that conclusion that I said. This is something about volunteers going and doing packing lists. So one thing this diagram did was very quickly let me have an understanding, just in the broad administrative managerial sense, of what might be going on. So as I said, the boxes in a crow's foot diagram represent the entities. The things listed in the boxes are the attributes, the specific kinds of information we want to keep track of about those items. So I know that in the system somebody is proposing or has suggested that for a volunteer we want to know their last name, or we want to know their first name, or we want to know their street address, city. Okay, now think about a volunteer. None of that says out of the blue, oh, where'd they come up with that? Really? Volunteers, we want to know their phone number? Right. This isn't rocket science necessarily. It's just making evident the kinds of things that go on. Now, some of these are a little bit harder, but for assignments, and we got some of this confusing stuff at top, but we want to keep track of a start and an end time. Okay, start, that must be something about their assignments. Do that. Tasks have a description, some kind of type, and a status. And we don't know much about those, but I can tell that those are the attributes that they want to keep track of. Okay, and so for each of these, again, we're not going to get everything from this, but I can tell a lot about it. Some of the attributes are bold-faced. Okay, you might see the first name, last name, just have a little bit of boldface there. Start time, end time, even these things up at the top. We'll get to what these PKs and FKs are here. This notation says, boldface those items that are required. So when you add a volunteer, you have to know their last name and first name. These guys maybe don't have to be filled in. When you add an item, you need the description, value, quantity, but the volunteer ID and task code that might be unmentioned, right? So I'm getting a lot of richness even about how this thing is implemented. Some of the attributes are elevated. Those attributes that have a PK next to them, they're also emphasized by being underlined, are part of what's called the primary key. Some attribute, piece of information that uniquely identifies a particular task is a task code. Volunteer ID uniquely identifies a particular volunteer. Just like perhaps your student ID here on campus identifies exactly what student you are. You know, oh, give me your, we used to call them 927 numbers because they all began 927. Give me your student ID. I can get this other information because the system is built on that. These don't duplicate, and there's lots of good properties about primary keys and how to determine what the primary keys ought to be. The come-in database, we're not that. We're just trying to understand what a ERD does. So an ERD, entity relationship diagram, helps me identify not only what are the entities, the things we're keeping track of, their attributes, the things that we want to keep track of about volunteers, and also that one or sometimes multiple attributes that uniquely identify a particular attribute. Now here for an assignment, we've got not two primary keys, but two attributes that make up the primary key. A volunteer ID and a task code together identify an assignment. So we have a volunteer and we have a thing that needs to be done, put them together, and we have an assignment. Todd Schultz, do a video. Todd Schultz is assigned to do the video. There we are. So that's what it means. We can have more than one attribute be the primary key. This FK that you notice next to some of these, that's short for foreign key. Okay. What we want to do is be able to, for an assignment, know who the volunteer to do it is. And so this volunteer would be a volunteer in this table. It's a primary key here. It's a foreign key here, meaning we use to find out information about the volunteer. The package maps back to the volunteer. The package also maps back or tells me a particular task code I can look up. And I know that because they said those are foreign keys. Okay. Finally, what this diagram does, and it tells me a ton, is something about the relationships and the cardinality of those relationships. So it says, oh, a volunteer is assigned to an assignment because they have this line drawing things and they gave it a label, is assigned to. And a task is used in an assignment. An assignment results in a packing task, okay? And so on it goes, but I can tell that because they've drawn a line that connects one to the other. And they've done something else, and this is called cardinality. They've got some little glyphs here on the end, and there's always, well, in this notation, there's always two aspects to the glyph. And it talks about the minimum and maximum cardinality of the relationship. And you always do it kind of going from and to. So kind of going this direction, it says a particular volunteer might have 0 assignments, but in general could have many. That's what that crow's foot, that's why it gets the crow's foot notation, could have many. So that three-pronged thing means many, the open circle means 0. Particular volunteer might have 0, that's a minimum cardinality. Might have is a maximum of many or a bunch. You know, it's 0, 1, or many are the only choices there. We don't go 3 and 7. Although sometimes there might be business rules that say that. Now coming the other way and looking at the cardinality, an assignment has a minimum of 1 and a maximum of 1. And that means 1 and only 1. Every assignment has exactly 1 volunteer assigned to it. That tells me something about these assignments. There's no team assignments, right? An assignment has 1 and only 1 volunteer. Now, a different model might say, you know, an assignment could have, and I'm going to try to draw it here, it might come in and look like something like this, 1 or many. And that would be a different business situation where, oh, an assignment has to have at least 1 person, but might have many assigned to it. You'd even have a 0 in many, right? Oh, well, maybe we have some assignments that haven't been assigned yet. But in this model, they are saying if we've set up an assignment, there has to be a volunteer to go with it. And I can tell that by looking at the data model. I can't tell if that's the right data model for their business processes because I don't know enough about their business process, but I can tell what the diagram is telling me. Okay. Similarly, every assignment has one and only one task. A particular task might be used in no assignments, but in general, many. Okay. And so I have something about the cardinality. The dotted line we don't need to versus the solid line tells me something. It's not an important thing for us to get into. It tells me whether the relationship is an identifying relationship. That is, this packing list ID is not part of this key, so the packing list is not an identifying relationship, but it's still a relationship. Okay, so just a little bit about the diagram. We're going to work shortly on just the mechanics of reproducing them, but what's the fun of reproducing something if you don't have a sense of what it's for? That's the crow's foot. Sometimes ERDs, and I don't see this as much except in textbooks, occasionally in talks and walkthroughs, kind of from a professional point of view, the crow's foot or something like it. It has a whole lot more richness and is more compact than that, but sometimes you see the crow's foot, sometimes you see the crow's foot, but without the attributes. But how does the crow's foot go? Again, it's entities and relationships. The entities here are these rounded rectangles. We're keeping track of teachers, subjects that they do, students, and it looks like student groups. Okay, so it looks, and marks. So it looks like a teacher course management and grading system. Did a little bird come and tell me that? No. I looked at the diagram and it was evident by the diagram, and that's why diagrams are kind of powerful and useful, and we use them to do things. So like we would have had those boxes before, now they're rounded rectangles. What they do in CHANS is for the attributes, it's called a lollipop diagram sometimes, or a stick and circle diagram. They lollipop out. Oh, a subject's going to have a title. The green in this case means that's a required field. You can't add a subject unless we know the title. The primary key for that entity, the primary key attribute for that entity is subject ID. I know that because of the underline. Let's see, marks have a mark ID, something that identifies them, maybe Tech Prac 1, this, grade or something. A date, not underlined, not green, so that I guess is optional. Looks like they're using two versions of green here, but a mark, whatever the ABCD, is required. So a mark has those attributes. A teacher has a first name and a last name required, identified by a teacher ID. Student has a first name, last name required, identified by student ID. Okay? And if it's entity and relationships, then we have relationships. And so there's saying, there's a relationship between teachers and subjects because a teacher supervises subjects and a teacher also supervises groups. Students have a relationship with groups and the groups they belong to. Teacher gives, combined with the student's work and a teacher's assessment, that's what provides a mark. But it's saying these guys are related, and we've done enough probably with that business context, that is for students and classes, that we understand. Again, it's just a way to represent the things we're tracking, the attributes we're tracking about them, and what the relationships are. And from this, we can go on to build a database or some data structure. But what we're worried about in this case is, well, how would I get Visio to help me diagram that? And I think most of this is going to be pretty self-explanatory. Let me finally then jump into Visio. And I was going to try to get out of the show, and just work a little bit on the mechanics. Okay, so now I'm going into Visio. I'm starting with a blank diagram, leaving it US units. I'm going to do it visually anyway. And the best thing is, let's do the crow's foot. I click on search, and there's crow's foot, and it's kind of built into Visio to have these particular attributes. I'm not going to try to necessarily copy one they have there, so I don't have to go back and forth, but let me just zoom a little bit and do page width, say here, just to bring it into focus. But we have an entity, and one of the entities, notice it brought in a PK, an attribute name, and these blank attribute names, and we might not have two attributes, might have more. We can do something about that. But if I click on entity name, and we had It was the second example, but I will just, hit teacher. And then something like a teacher ID. I went ahead and made that the primary key, and they had a last name as one of the attributes, first name is another attribute, and maybe we wanted office number too. Okay, so if we wanted office number, we could just bring another one of these attributes and just kind of drop it in here, and office number. I mean their physical number, like where their office is located. Yeah, I can take one of these. Oops, click on the attribute and thought there was something. Oh, that was showing the attribute type. Never. I mean, we don't need to do that. We could go that far. I think maybe I need to go down here. Set required. So if it needs to be required, see how that boldface, it's a little bit. So get on the attribute and we can make it a required field. And yeah, great. So that's the teacher entity. Let's just pull another relationship in here. And trying to make the difference between a course and a scheduled course or something. This is and in this case, we're thinking a course schedule has a teacher. How about a course? I really shouldn't make it too working on mechanics. But we have a schedule ID. That's the primary key, and this can be some number. And for that, we're going to need a teacher ID. I'm making explicit who's teaching the course. Sometimes when that's hidden, let me get that out of there and try this again, because I want to show how you can make something and set foreign key. Makes it clear that, okay, especially when I make the relationship, and we'll just go time of day or something. We're going to need some other things in there, like probably before it would be all done, has the schedule know what course. Okay, so course ID or something, but it probably means there's going to be something about another course relationship, and you kind of saw the other. I'm trying to do mechanics. Okay, so we got the mechanics of bringing these guys out. If we need to separate the primary keys, adding entities, can you just, what if I didn't want that, pull it out and delete it, get on the end if you put in something you don't want, and then we do build this relationship. Now, to my nickel, Visio 2010 did a much better job of this. And so we have something that's got a couple of ends on here, so I'm going to grab this end and lock it in. I was hoping, there we go. Lock it in on the outside, highlight on this, grab this end, and lock it in there. And make sure it's kind of tied to the figure so as you move things around it works. And you can also maybe make it a curved connector if you want, just a little more elegant. I don't know that that's the best drawing it did. But one of my disappointments is these connectors at the end are a little bit small. And let's see, it just put some cardinalities down there. So I'm going to right click on this, and the beginning symbol says 0 or more, but on this end, on what's on the left end, so set beginning symbol, I think a schedule, like a course schedule, we don't have team teaching, it's one and only one. But a teacher, so I'm going to set end symbol now. Oh, maybe they're not having any classes, but maybe it's 0 or more. So what that did, that I can update the cardinalities to indicate that for my data model, a teacher might not have a class, but in general has many classes in their schedule, but a scheduled class has to have a teacher. And I think you can work with this a little bit, and if we don't want it, if it's not an identifying, I wouldn't worry about that, but if you want that dotted line, then you uncheck set identifying, and I think there is something in format shape that thought that would do it. Set the I was going to set the arrow size, and we get rid of that. See if that helped. That made these a little bit more visible. Like I said, I think Visio 2010 did a better job of this rather than do a bit retro version. There we go. So, expressing a data model, somebody can do this. That's a chins diagram. Yeah, as we know, so that's page 1. I'm just going to come to another tab. Excuse me, that's a crow's foot. We'll do a chins. Right. So I'm going to page 2, and if I needed to do a chins format, okay, they have entities, attributes, and relationships. Oh, by the way, back to this guy, I could label this and call it is assigned to. So the particular schedule is assigned to an instructor. So sometimes you don't label those when it's kind of obvious, but that's that. So that is that guy now here on page 2, and to do a chins diagram, a little different, you know, the entity. Go ahead and view zoom. This guy view zoom, and page width seemed to work pretty well. Now we might have something like just doing that last example. We have an entity. It's called teacher. One of the attributes of a teacher. See, to me, that's why this kind of notation isn't as helpful as a last name. It takes a lot of space for, you know, having these lollipops pop out. But sometimes maybe your audience is a yeah, that makes it a little different, and the other one looks a little bit technical. What do they call this? A schedule. And of course, we can have other attributes here. I was just not taking the time. Once you know, the mechanics wise, once you've done one, you can do multiple. If you set it as the primary key, well, we'll take this. It's not really our primary key. See how it underlines it? That's right clicking. If it's a multi-valued attribute, like kind of a list of things, there's kind of the circle within the circle notation. Like, oh, we might have multiple last names for a teacher. We don't, but maybe we have degrees or something like that. Might be a multi-valued attribute. I forget what the notation is. Oh, derived means we could calculate it. You know, how many years have they been working here? Maybe we could derive that from that. Oh, if you want to be required, then what it did was boldface it in this case. Okay, so especially the first time, your guys, it's going to be a little hard to tell if that's boldface, but that's how we do that. And add attributes. About the only other thing, and it's a little bit kind of painful, because not only do you have to bring in the there is no connector that's available over there, and so what you'll have to do, I did insert and bring down a connector, and you need 2 of them, because it kind of one comes and one goes. Or I can grab that one and paste it, just to get the kind of the notion that, okay, these guys are both assigned to. And in this case, it's probably best to have them do straight or maybe curved. And good. So teacher is assigned to a schedule, and we could put attributes. Always, you know, I'm just being fast and loose by not labeling them, but I'm working on the mechanics and, you know, the attributes. I forget, you know, what's the day and time or something like that. All right. So, you know, these are real bona fide, you know, they're documented ways to display diagrams about data, and I think I've given you enough bullets to work. So good luck doing them. Catch you later.